stop by today because today we are going to be working on quite a large piece. In fact, I'm actually working on something that a lot of you have suggested, which is an ice-style dragon. So I drew up a design and that's what we're going to do today. Anyways, let's get started. Okay guys, so we're going to start on the sewing for our dragon first. So right here is the pattern, and my idea for this body is going to be kind of like a Chinese long dragon. So it's not going to have wings or anything, and I kind of want to make it look a little bit either wolf or fox-like in style. So I have my pattern all drawn out, and I've also got it divided into different sections because we're going to use different types of fabrics and also different colors on different parts of the body. So I'm going to use this pattern to get my fabric cut out, and then we're going to start sewing everything together. So since our dragon is an ice dragon, I'm going to stick with a lot of cooler colors, so we're going to kind of stick more around the blues and the purples. So the main color of the body is going to be a nice icy blue, and then the accent colors are going to be purples and grays. So these are going to be the fabric pieces that you're going to need. So of course we have all the pieces for the sides of the body, then we also have a strip of fur fabric for the belly and the back of the dragon, and then we have the inside parts of the legs, and just everything is already cut out, and we're going to start sewing everything together. So I'm going to start with the strips of fur fabric that are going to go on the belly and the back of the dragon, and part of it is going to be purple because I'm going to have the dragon have a mane, so I'm going to sew these pieces together first. Now before we start putting the rest of the body together, I realized I wanted to have a scaling effect going down the body. So I've done this with a few other creatures, so I'm going to be using a fake leather for this, and we're actually going to grab that pattern that we have originally that we used to cut the fabric pieces out, and we're going to draw the patterns of the scales on the side pieces. So I'm just going to roughly draw that out on our paper pattern, and then I'm going to take an X-Acto knife and I'm going to start cutting out our scale patterns. Pretty much what I'm doing right now is I'm making a stencil so we can trace it onto the fabric. So I'm going to get all those scale patterns cut out, and then I'm going to lay this on our fabric pieces and use my pen to draw out the lines for the scales. Once I have it all drawn out on the fabric, I'm going to take the pieces of fake leather that I want to use for the scales, and I'm going to start pinning everything together. So I've had these pieces of silver fake leather kind of laying about in my fabric section, and they've all been kind of too small to use until now. They are actually the perfect size for this. So I'm going to pin them all into place, and then I'm going to use my sewing machine to go around each scale and sew it into place. So again, we're just going to be following all of our lines with our sewing machine, and then once we're done, we're going to cut off all the excess fabric. Now with these scales, you don't have to be extremely detailed or anything, just simple squares that are slightly offset will work just fine. So I'm going to get all my scales done, and then we can start putting the rest of the body together. So we're just going to take our pieces that we sewed scales on along with the rest of the pieces for the sides of the body, and we're just going to kind of sew everything together. We're going to do this for both sides, and then we can take the inside parts of the legs and sew those in place as well. Now we're just going to go down the front of them because this is going to be on a wire frame, and we want to make it as easy as possible to get the wire frame inside of the body. And then lastly, we're going to take that long strip of fabric, which is the belly piece, and we're going to sew that in between the two body pieces. Now normally with my belly pieces, I kind of have them stop halfway down the tail and then I sew the rest of the tail closed, but this piece is actually going to have the strip going all the way to the end of the tail. So your body is going to look something like this. Of course, we still have the strip of fabric that goes down the back of the dragon, but we can't add that until we start putting everything together. So the next thing that we're going to work on is the clay pieces for the dragon. So I'm going to start with the face first, and then we'll move on to making the clay feet. So the type of clay that I'm going to be using is Original Sculpting. I like using Original Sculpting because it's a lot softer on the hands, so if you have really weak hands, kind of like me because I use them all the time, it's just a lot easier to work with. It's smoother and stuff, and you don't have to really push as hard. Plus, it's a lot cheaper than most of the other Sculpties. I believe it's almost half the price of most of the other different types. So what I've done so far is I've taken a large lump of tin foil and I've kind of shaped it into a cone shape, and then I started layering my clay on top of it. So I completely covered my tin foil and I smoothed everything out, and I just kind of roughly shaped it into what I wanted the face to look like. So I roughed out a shape, I made sure everything was nice and smooth, and then I can start adding my details on top of this. So normally the eyes are the first thing I like adding because then you can use them to kind of judge where you want everything else to be. Also, they have a lot more expression in them than any other part of the face, so once you have the eyes done and you know what you want the expression to look like, you can base all of the other features off of that. So after I got the eyes in place, the next detail I'm going to add to the face is going to be the mouth and the nose. So this part is really where I'm going to start getting more of my foxy type style to my dragon. I think I'm going to go more fox than wolf this time. A good example of what I'm going for facial wise is kind of like the dragon Haku from Spirited Away. I want to have that very similar facial structure, but I don't want it to look like Haku. I want it to maybe look like a very similar species. So after I have the main facial details in place, the next thing I'm going to work on is adding some horns to the face. So the first set of horns that I'm using, I sculpted quite a while back and I never ended up using them, and I thought they would work really well for this piece. So I'm just going to kind of push them in place, make sure I like the positioning of them, and then we're going to add the next set. The next set of horns that I'm using are made out of epoxy resin. Now these are actually safe to go in the oven, but I would pay attention to them just to be safe. So I wouldn't bake them any longer than 55 minutes or something, which is about how much I'm going to have to bake this face. Also, along with the epoxy resin horns, I do have a gem made out of resin that I'm going to put right in the middle of the forehead. And then I have a bunch of gemstones that I'm going to add between the horns as well. So I'm going to start adding clay around all of these pieces that I added and kind of just decorate the face. After that, I decided to go back and add a little bit more detail to the mouth. So I'm going to add a set of teeth sticking out of it, and I'm also going to add some like wrinkles in the face, along with some whiskers going down the side of the face. And then after I have those in place, I'm going to add the rest of the details to the nose, and then I'm going to start adding fur texture to the rest of the face. So for the nose, I'm just mainly working on shaping the nostrils, and then for the fur texture, I'm just using a really fine tool and I'm scratching into the clay and making layers of scratches. Now before I add the fur texture to it, I do want to add little divots for where I'm going to actually put fake fur. So like where the chin is, I'm going to kind of make a little hole, and we're going to end up putting fake fur here so it looks like he has kind of like a goatee or something. And then I'm also going to be doing that to the sides of the face. So yeah, I know this looks a little bit weird, but it will look a lot better once we have the fur in place, which will be a while because we need to paint this and everything too. So after that, I'm just going to add a little bit more detail to everything, and then I'm going to start adding that fur texture that I was talking about over the entire face. And then once I was happy with how the face looks, I'm going to put this in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 45 to 55 minutes like I said. Now we can start on the clay feet. So for our clay feet, we're going to have to use a support frame so everything is nice and strong and won't break. So I have a little frame set up for each foot. And these are really simple, they're just a bunch of wires kind of bunched together for each toe. So for my feet, I want them to roughly have about 4 toes. Of course, the front feet, I'm going to add dew claws to them, but I don't have to worry about the wire frame for that just yet. So every time I do my clay feet, the first thing I add to the wire frame is the claws. So I put a little bit of clay at the end of each wire, and then I just kind of roughly start shaping it with my fingers until I have a nice point. And then once we have all of our claws in place, this is going to get pre-baked for probably about 15 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. We're going to get that out of the oven, cooled, and then we can start on the bottoms of the feet. So the bottoms of the feet, we're just going to start layering clay on our wire frame, just get everything completely covered, and then we can start shaping it to make little joints and stuff like that. So right now, all of our feet are exactly the same. So I'm going to change up the front feet just slightly. So I'm going to take a small piece of wire, and this is going to be used to make a frame for our dew claw. So I'm going to start covering this in clay. I'm going to add a claw to it and a few scales, and we're just going to kind of smush this onto the side of the foot. After that's in place, we're going to bake our feet for a second time, 275 Fahrenheit, for probably 20-25 minutes this time. And then after those are out of the oven and have cooled to touch, we can start adding scales to the tops of the feet. So for that, I'm just going to roll out a bunch of little balls of clay, and I'm going to start layering them on the toes and going up the leg. I'm going to use my tools to kind of refine the shape and make sure everything is nice and smooth, and then we're going to bake our feet for one final time, 275 Fahrenheit again, and we're probably going to do it for about 45 minutes this time. And then after that, that's our last bake. Everything should be done. We'll wait till everything is cooled to touch, and then we can start painting everything. Okay, now the painting for our clay pieces is going to be quite a bit different from most of the painting that I do. In fact, we're going to be painting them in kind of sections because we're also going to be resining them in between the painting, if that makes any sense. I want to do some cool glittering effect, and this is the best way I figured to do it. So with the face, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to be painting in between all the gemstones, just a nice black to kind of fill in the gaps. And then we're also going to be painting the main horns. So the really long horns, we're going to be painting those, kind of an off blue. We're going to let all of this dry, and then we're going to mix up some resin, and we're going to go over everything that we painted and the gems. Now this is the part that's a little bit tricky. Resin is kind of drippy when it's fresh, and I need to let it cure, but not completely. So what we're going to do is we're going to have to let this sit and dry for probably 2 to 3 hours. You want it to dry enough to where the resin isn't dripping anymore. Because normally when I resin my pieces, they kind of drip, and I go and check them and wipe drips away. So I'm basically doing the same thing, except once I find out that the drips have stopped, I'm going to take some glitter and I'm going to go over everything that's resined. So we're just going to kind of sprinkle glitter over everything that's resined. We want to make sure everything is completely covered in glitter. We're going to knock off whatever glitter doesn't stick to the resin, and then we're going to set this aside to finish curing. So this is probably going to cure overnight, and then the following day we can start painting the rest of the face. So for the rest of the dragon, I want it to match the body, which is that nice icy blue. So I'm going to primer the face with that, and then I'm going to start adding highlights and lowlights to this. I'm going to add some shadowing around the whiskers, and I think I'm going to actually leave the whiskers white. I kind of want them to stand out. Also need to add some shadowing inside the nostrils so it looks like they kind of go inside of the face a bit more than they actually do. I'm going to add some spots here and there, just add some textures and different colors, just whatever I feel like adding to the face to make it look a little bit more realistic. I'm going to finish painting the nose a nice gray, and then I'm going to move on to the eyes. For the eyes, I want them to stand out, but I don't want to go away from the color palette of the blues and purples. I want it to stay very similar to that, so I'm going to kind of go with a very bright blue. I'm going to add some purple highlights going around the face. Since we are going to have a purple mane, this will help it kind of blend into the rest of the face later when we put everything together. And then lastly, I'm going to use a gold modeling paint around all those details around the horns and the gems. Now, I absolutely loved how the glitter came out with the horns, so I want to kind of incorporate it with the feet. So we're going to do a little bit of painting, and then we're going to kind of do resining and glittering, and there's a lot of layers to this. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to primer the bottoms of the feet. So the front feet are going to be gray, so I'm going to be using gray on them, and then the back feet are going to be purple, so I'm going to be using purple on them. So I'm going to go over all the bottoms of the feet, get that all nice and dried, and then we're going to go paint over all of those scales on the tops of the feet. So the scales are where we're going to add the glitter. So the color that we're going to do, since I want it to match the horns, is going to be that light blue that we did on the horns before we glittered them. So I'm going to paint over all of those scales, make sure they're nice and coated. We want a nice even surface, so we might have to do 2 layers. And then we're going to paint the claws just a simple black to go with everything. So here's where it gets a little bit complicated to do the glittering. I can't get the glitter on the bottoms of the feet. Now the glitter is going to stick to paint, but it won't stick to already cured resin because it's kind of glossy. So what we need to do is we need to resin our feet first. We're going to let that cure overnight, and then the following day what we're going to do is we're going to resin the scales on the tops of the feet a second time. So like the horns, we're going to have to let this sit and cure for a little bit, and then we can start adding the glitter. So I'm just going to sprinkle it over all of the feet, make sure it's nice and set. I don't need to cover it completely because honestly I like how the glitter fades from purple to blue at the edges. So we're just going to kind of sprinkle over the top and see what sticks. Now we just need to let this finish curing, and then once all of our clay pieces have finished curing from their resining, we can start putting everything together. Okay, so it's the following day, everything is nice and dry, and we can start putting our dragon together. So I have a very simple wire frame to start with. Now the front is a little bit reinforced, so I added extra wires to the neck and the front legs, but the rest of it's just one piece of wire. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our fabric body that we sewed earlier and we're going to run it over the wire frame, kind of like we're putting on clothes. So we're going to get all the wires for the legs through the holes for the legs, and then we're going to start adding the clay feet to the ends of these. So I'm going to bend them into place, and we're going to take a thinner gauge wire and start wrapping it all the way around the wires, connecting everything together. We're going to do this to all 4 of the feet, and then we can start adding the fabric around the base of the feet. Now for this piece, I'm actually going to be trying a new adhesive. Normally I use a mixture of hot glue and E6000 to put everything together, but this time around I'm going to be trying fabric tack. I've had a lot of people recommend this. For some reason they recommend it because it's safer, but I actually don't think that's the case. The reason I'm saying this is because once I open this, I realized that this glue is actually acetone based. So that means that it's kind of like nail polish remover or paint thinner. Now the good thing is once this dries, it dries quick, the fumes are kind of just gone and it doesn't smell, but it has a very strong smell, so I recommend if you're using any of it to be in a really well ventilated area, just to be safe, because I don't think this is safer than E6000. If anything, it's probably in the same ballpark. So I'm not going to be recommending this because it's safer, because anything that dries and has a fume is dangerous to work around. You just need to make sure that you know how to take the precautions and be in a well ventilated area, and if you start feeling like dizzy or anything, to get away from the thing or put the thing outside that you're working on and let it air out. But I am going to be recommending it because it does work better than E6000. So if you want a stronger hold, I would use fabric tack and not E6000. So I'm going to be using this to glue the fabric for the legs around the ankles of the clay feet. So I'm going to do this to all 4 of the feet, and then I'm also going to be using it to glue the fabric for the neck around the base of the head. So we're going to get that in place, and we're also going to be gluing the strip of fabric for the back of the dragon into place on the top of the head. And then what we need to do next is we just need to stuff and close everything up. So we're going to be stuffing as we go, that way it's a lot easier. So I'm going to kind of sew the neck, stuff that, sew the body a little bit more, stuff that, and then just keep going down the body until everything is stuffed and closed up. After we have the body closed up, I'm going to take my hair trimmer and I'm going to start shaving the fur for the body and just kind of shaping it a bit more so it looks a bit better. And then lastly, we're going to add a little bit of fur to the face that I was talking about earlier. So I'm going to give him a little goatee and some sideburns, and then he is completely done. Okay guys, and that's how I made a ice dragon. I had so much fun with this piece, especially since we tried a few new materials and tried a few new techniques, and hopefully we can use those in future projects. Anyways, I'm gonna have him along with a bunch of other creatures in my Etsy shop, so check the links down below if you want to buy anything. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!